In the winter of 1944-45, when 22,000 Dutch citizens starved to death, not in a concentration camp, not in some distant war zone, but in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague, wealthy European cities. And here's the part that makes it unbelievable. The war was already won. The Allies had liberated the south of Holland in September. They were 50 miles away. They could have liberated the north, could have saved those 22,000 people. But they made a strategic decision that it wasn't worth the resources. So for 6 months, while the Allies focused on other priorities, the Dutch ate tulip bulbs to survive. Now, tulip bulbs are toxic. They taste like soap. They make you sick. But they have some calories, and when there's nothing else left, you eat them anyway. This is the story of how 22,000 people starved to death in the final stretch of a war that was already decided. It's winter in Amsterdam. A woman stands in her kitchen with hands that shake from cold and hunger. She's holding a tulip bulb she found in the frozen ground. She peels it carefully with a knife, trying not to waste any of it. Her children watch with hollow eyes from the corner of the room. She puts the bulb into a pot of water that's barely warm. There's no fuel left to heat it properly, no coal, no wood. They burned the furniture weeks ago. This isn't a famine in some distant war zone or undeveloped country. This is Amsterdam, a wealthy European capital. 20,000 people are about to starve to death in the next few months, while the war is basically already won. I still can't throw away food, even now in 2025, 80 years later, even when it's gone bad and I know I shouldn't eat it. There's still this resistance, this voice in my head that said, I could eat this. My grandmother didn't throw away a crumb, not one. My mom, born in 1941, grew up watching her mother save everything. Bread crusts, vegetable peelings, anything. And that got passed down to me. You could open a whole nature versus nurture discussion about this, whether trauma gets passed down through generations, whether it's in our DNA or just learned behavior. But we're not going to do that, because this story isn't about psychology or epigenetics. It's about the winter of 1944 into 45 in the Netherlands. The Hongerwinter. About how the Allies liberated the south of Holland in September of 1944 and then stopped. They left the north to starve for 6 more months while they prioritized other strategic targets. About how 20,000 Dutch civilians died of starvation and cold in the final months of a war that was already decided. And about how an entire nation's relationship with food changed forever. To understand how this happened, you need to understand where the Netherlands was in September of 1944. By this point, the war is clearly ending. Germany is losing on every front. The Allies have landed in Normandy. They've liberated Paris, and they're pushing east toward Germany. On September 5th, 1944, a day the Dutch call Dolle Dinsdag, rumors spread that the Allies are coming to liberate the Netherlands. At any moment. People are celebrating in the streets. The Dutch Nazi Party and collaborators are fleeing to the north in panic. The Allied forces do arrive. Operation Market Garden launches on September 17th. The goal is to capture a series of bridges in the Netherlands and create a route straight to Germany to end the war by Christmas. The operation succeeds in the south. Cities like Eindhoven and Nijmegen are liberated. But at Arnhem, the operation fails. The bridge is a bridge too far. And this is where the Netherlands gets split in two. The south, below the major rivers, is liberated. American and British troops are there. Food supplies can't come in. The north, however, above the river, including Amsterdam, Rotterdam, The Hague, and Utrecht, remains under German occupation. And the Germans are angry. The Dutch government in exile in London makes a decision. They order the Dutch railroad workers to go on strike, stop all train traffic, make it impossible for the Germans to move troops and supplies. It's a strategic move to help the Allied forces. On September 17th, 30,000 Dutch railroad workers walk off the job. The strike is very effective. German military logistics in the Netherlands grind to a halt. But there's a pickle. The Allies don't advance further north. They decided to consolidate their gains in the south and focus on other strategic priorities, like opening the port to Antwerp to bring in supplies. Northern Holland is left occupied, with the railroad shut down and the winter around the corner. The German response is brutal and calculated. 10 days after the strike begins on September 27th, Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Nazi Reichscommissioner for the occupied Holland, announces a food embargo. No food can be transported into the northern provinces by ship or canal. It's collective punishment, economic warfare against Dutch civilians for the railroad strike, and it's about to become the deadliest winter in modern Dutch history. It's November, the first signs appear. Food rations, which were already low, start dropping. The rations fall below 1,000 calories a day, then to 580 calories a day by February of 45. For context, that's about 1/4 of what an adult needs to survive. People start burning furniture to stay warm. Then they start tearing down abandoned buildings for wood. The trees in Amsterdam's parks are cut down for fuel. The canals freeze over. It's one of the coldest winters on record. People start eating tulip bulbs. They're toxic and taste terrible, but you can boil them and they have some calories. Sugar beets become a luxury. You can make a thin soup out of it if you're lucky enough to find them. Families send children on hunger journeys to the countryside, hoping farmers will have food. Children walk for miles in the freezing cold begging at farms. Some farmers help, many can't. They're starving too, and the Germans have confiscated most of their produce. People are collapsing in the streets. Hospitals are overwhelmed, but there's nothing they can do. They have no food, no fuel, no medicine. The death rate spikes. In Amsterdam alone, over 10,000 people die between November 1944 and May 1945. Let me give you some context for what this meant. Anne Frank died in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp in the winter of 1945. You know her name, everybody knows her name. Her diary is one of the most famous books about the Holocaust. She died of typhus in a concentration camp while the Hongerwinter was happening back in Amsterdam, where she hid in the attic. But here's what most people don't realize. While Anne Frank was dying in Bergen-Belsen, thousands of Dutch civilians who weren't in concentration camps were also dying from starvation in their own homes. Now, this wasn't targeted genocide like the Holocaust. This was indiscriminate starvation. It didn't matter who you were. If you lived in northern Holland during that winter, you were at risk of dying from hunger. Pregnant women suffering miscarriages from malnutrition. Elderly people dying because their bodies could not survive on 500 calories. Children developing diseases from vitamin deficiencies. The official death toll is estimated at about 22,000 people. The real number is probably much higher because many deaths weren't properly recorded during the chaos. So here's the obvious question. Why didn't the Allies just liberate the North? They were right there. The South was already liberated. Why leave so many Dutch civilians to starve? The answer is strategic priorities. After Market Garden failed, the Allied command decided the northern Netherlands wasn't the main objective anymore. They needed to clear the Scheldt estuary where the river meets the North Sea. As long as Germans controlled the Scheldt, the Allies couldn't use the port of Antwerp to bring in supplies. And without Antwerp, nothing could reach the starving Dutch in the north. General Eisenhower and the Allied command made a calculation. liberating North Holland wasn't worth the cost in troops and time when they could be pushing toward Germany instead. From a pure military standpoint, it made a lot of sense. End the war faster by going straight for Germany rather than spending resources liberating every occupied territory. But the cost of that decision was paid for by the Dutch. 20,000 dead, hundreds of thousands affected by malnutrition, an entire generation traumatized. By April of 1945, the situation is desperate. The Swedish Red Cross and the Dutch government in exile are begging the Allies to do something. The Germans, realizing they're about to lose the war, agree to a ceasefire for humanitarian purposes. On April 29th, Operation Manna begins. British Lancaster bombers and American B-17s flying fortresses fly over the Netherlands at extremely low altitude. We're talking about 300 to 400 feet, and they drop food packages instead of bombs. Bread, chocolate, canned goods, flour, as much as the planes could carry. Planes fly so low that people on the ground can see the crews waving. Some guys throw candy out the window for the children. It's one of the most remarkable moments of the war. Bombers that had been dropping explosives for years are now dropping food to save the people they've been fighting to liberate. The operation continues until May 7th. Over 11,000 tons of food are dropped. Over 5,500 flights are flown. For the Dutch, it's the most incredible moment in their lifetime, but for the 20,000 who died, it's too late. May 5th, 1945, the Netherlands is officially liberated. The war is over.
Met de voetjes van de vloer, kom er niet maar bij. De zon schijnt op de grachten, oh wat zijn we blij. Schenk de glazen nog eens vol voor ons, proost op broeder leven. Laat ons dansen tot de ochtend, door de stad te zwijven. Oh Amsterdam, wat ben je mooi, met je lach en met je zang. We vieren feest de hele nacht en de hele avond lang. Heel de buurt die zingt nu mee, van de Jordaan tot aan het IJ. En op deze dag is iedereen zo gelukkig en zo vrij.
The physical effects of the Hongerwinter were catastrophic. Researchers have studied this event extensively. It's one of the few well-documented famines in a developed nation. Children who were in the womb of starving mothers during the Hongerwinter have higher rates of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease in later life. Stress and malnutrition literally altered their development in ways that showed up decades later. People who lived through it as adults often had permanent health problems. Beyond the physical effects, there were the obvious psychological ones. An entire generation became obsessed with food security. They saved everything and wasted nothing. My grandmother's generation never fully trusted that food would always be available, and unwillingly, they passed that anxiety down. Those Dutch dishes I grew up with, stamppot, boerenkool, zuurkool, hutspot, most people think they're just traditional Dutch comfort food, and they are. They've been part of the Dutch cuisine since the 1600s. Peasant food, simple, filling, cheap. The Hongerwinter changed what they meant. Stamppot had been around for centuries. Mashed potatoes mixed with vegetables, kale, sauerkraut, or endive. It was winter food because it was hearty and used vegetables that could survive the cold. But during the Hongerwinter, it became something different. It became one of the few dishes you could still make when you had almost nothing. Boerenkool, kale, mashed with potatoes, you could make this because kale was one of the last vegetables still growing in the frozen ground. These dishes went from being traditional comfort food to being literal survival food. And after the war, they stayed that way. My grandmother's generation continued making them not because they were traditional, but because it saved their lives. These dishes now carried a weight they'd never had before. We still eat them in the winter. I make it often. Every Dutch household knows how to make stamppot. But for anyone who lived through the Hongerwinter, these weren't just recipes. They were memories, the proof of survival. Some traumas become tradition. I think about this sometimes when I'm trying to throw away food. My rational brain says, it's been in the fridge for a week, just throw it out. But there's another voice, quiet, older, that says, maybe it's still good. That voice ain't mine, it's my grandmother's, it's my mom's. It's the voice of people who watched their neighbors die from starvation and swore they would never waste food again. My mom was born in 1941. She turned 4 in June, a month after our liberation. She doesn't remember the war directly, but the years of aftermath, when there was still scarcity, she remembers that. Her mother's obsession with food, the way she would save every scrap, the anxiety when the pantry got low. And that shaped how my mom raised me. And now I'm probably the last generation that carries this. My kids won't have it. They're growing up in a world where food is abundant, where grocery stores are always full, where throwing away leftovers is normal. They'll never understand why I can't throw away the stumple I made 2 weeks ago, or why I freak out when the refrigerator is empty. And of course they can't. They did not inherit the Hongerwinter, but I did. The Hongerwinter matters because it shows how strategic decisions made in wartime have consequences that last 4 generations. The Allied command made a rational military calculation. Don't spend resources liberating northern Holland when those resources could end the war faster by pushing into Germany. They probably saved more lives overall by ending the war sooner. But that calculation had a human cost that doesn't show up in the history books. 20,000 Dutch civilians died. Hundreds of thousands were permanently affected. An entire culture's relationship with food was fundamentally altered. And that trauma got passed down through generations. This is what war does. Not just to soldiers fighting it, but to the civilians caught in the middle of strategic calculations. Holland was on the winning side. We were the good guys. The Allies were liberating us. And still, 20,000 people starved to death because liberation wasn't convenient in the fall of 1944. That's a story they don't tell you about the Second World War. Liberation isn't all flowers and butterflies. Sometimes it's a strategic delay that costs thousands of lives. Sometimes the good guys make decisions that kill people they're trying to save. Not because they're evil, but because war is complicated and resources are finite. Commanders have to make impossible choices that I would never want to make. The Hongerwinter is what happens when those impossible choices land on ordinary people. People like my grandparents who never threw away a crumb for the rest of their lives. People like my mom who grew up in the shadow of the famine. Even for my generation who still can't throw away food 80 years later. Like I said, some traumas become tradition and some winters never really end. Thank you for watching. I'm Henry and this was What Now?